welcome to the birth of a new dimension. My name is Aurora. I usually introduce myself and say that I'm a galactic walk-in or a galactic scale abstraction in human form. And today I'm going to be speaking about how characteristics are like the recipe that comprise the meta personality or overarching personality of an individual, and relate this to extraterrestrial life. Brief pause. So I would like to say that one of the barriers for humanity understanding and being able to effectively interact with life that is in other places and in other forms, like other containers for consciousness or life that is moving at a radically different speed, like literally living on a different time scale and moving at a different speed, that part of it's not necessarily some malevolent plot, that there are I also understand that I am here communicating on this traumatized planet. So on the one hand, yes, this entire planet and all of the inhabitants here have all been subjected to malevolent limitations and experiences. And so when you have a negative experience or a trauma like that, then you tend to project forward and say, oh, hey, this is probably continuing to happen in other circumstances. But in this, so it's like, it's good to be skeptical. If you've bought a lemon in the past and then you're shopping again, you're like, I hope this isn't another lemon. So the idea is that many people might feel limited or constrained or cut off from the rest of the cosmos and the rest of cosmic intelligence. And they might think, oh, this is some malevolent thing that is going on. And I'm trying to say the real challenge is a cognitive challenge, where it's like, there are very many benevolent and loving beings who would like to be interacting with you and with the planet effectively. And one of the problems is that we cannot even understand how to find a common language, a common ground, and there are questions of characteristics creating meta-identity. So let me just get into all of this. Once we begin to become telepathic and become a telepathic society, our sense of individuated identity changes and shifts. And this is like saying you're not just you. If you're an individual computer or an individual phone, even though I'm not a transhumanist and I don't pretend that you are just a pile of circuits, but just using this as an example that we can all understand. If you have an individual computer, then that computer has the data that's on its particular hard drive. And if it connects with the internet, and all of a sudden that computer becomes a window to be able to connect with something much larger and much greater, where if you don't have that information in your own personal library, the information does exist out there somewhere. This is a very similar transformation that happens when human consciousness begins to become telepathic and multidimensional, because it's like your quote-unquote computer no longer only has access to what's on your quote-unquote hard drive. It means that you now become a being that can connect with the wisdom from deep antiquity, the wisdom that is from the future, and everything in between. And so we have to question, what is identity? So now I'm going to get a little bit into my own personal story. So I'm a galactic walk-in, whatever, for lack of a better term. There was a different ego occupant for the first 27 years of this body. And I am a new ego that was constructed or created or put together in adulthood after, a profound experience that left brain damage and also changed my perspective a lot. So all of this, brief pause. I sometimes use the analogy of a house that has burned down, that this brain that I'm using right now is very similar to a physical house that had a house fire. And it used to be shaped like, a regular colonial house with 2 bedrooms and, a living room. And after the fire, let's say 75% of the house and the structure was burned down. And instead of just recreating it and, going by the basic original blueprint of what that house was, the entire plan was changed. So that means in a literal sense, the math skills were obliterated from this brain, and some other aspects of crucial neurology were, burned out. And in order for me to be here and use this brain and effectively connect with reality and, communicate with other people that were here, we had to rebuild the house, but we didn't necessarily have to rebuild it in the same exact way. So I clearly have math skills now. And what I did was, this was like in 2003, 2004, so just a couple of years into my journey here, I figured out a new way to send signals around the damaged areas of my brain, and I used visualizations in order to learn to do math. Instead of thinking of it in terms of Arabic numerals or the way that you probably learned math, in your school a long time ago, what I do now is I envision packets of 10 and circles coming together, and I do it all in a visual, nonverbal sense. So it's like saying, maybe in the old kitchen of the old house, we used to cook over an electric stove. But now in the new house, like, we have put in a gas range, and it acts in a totally different way. And we still cook food, quote unquote, do math. However, the whole approach and the equipment is all different. And I bring this up not just for purposes of sharing my own personal information or anything like that. It is to say, I had to question and come to terms with the idea that when you make enough changes or additions or adjustments to an original thing, how much change before it's no longer the original thing? Like, the original house had its own particular shape, and now it has been completely changed and transformed. And it's like, maybe there's a little sliver of the original house, and there's also several new additions and wings and a pool and a tennis court and lots of good stuff that has been added on, to the point that I think we can no longer define this sense of self, this identity, by who used to be here that was it when the house was in a much different and smaller configuration. So I bring this all up because our identity is the culmination. Like, when you make a recipe, it's like a culmination. You are putting together many different ingredients, and each one of those ingredients adds up to the totality. And this is also true in the personality, in the sense of individuated personhood. You have a selection of characteristics. And, how the question here philosophically is, how many characteristics can we change about a person or a thing or a structure before we have to totally redefine our definition of what that thing is or what that structure is? If you took a car and you added wings to it, and then added a hull to it like a boat, and then added a propeller to it, and then added, a helicopter propeller to it, and added laser beams to it, added all these things to it, eventually you would have to say, we can't just define this as a car anymore, because it's more than that. It's become something different. So now let's talk about what it's like to be a part of a telepathic society. What that means is that you're not just the collection of what you have in terms of characteristics and basic propensities or a perspective or a way of thinking about life. You also have access to and are influenced by all of the other telepathic minds that you're connected to. And let's say you don't have a particular piece of information or a talent or a skill, but you can reach out and draw upon that information, talent, or skill that is coming from a different aspect of self that's not you, the individuated self, but is something that you're connected to. And this is what I'm trying to say is what real galactic society is all about. So I'm not, again, talking about the malevolent users of clank metal technology who have definitely suppressed and oppressed human consciousness and made it more difficult for humans on Earth, Earthlings right now, to be able to connect effectively with one another or with the time field and other, cosmic levels of consciousness. However, I'm trying to say that there's a whole galactic scale telepathic society, and what that partnership of minds is like. It is all consensual, first of all. So, again, to speak again to the trauma that everyone here has experienced, I understand that people here are like, hey, I'm not going to open myself up to any more BS because I've already been harmed and, traumatized, or, these vulnerabilities aren't good. It's just like having a sensitive area of your body that has been, horribly, injured by people that hate you. It's not the fault of that area of your body. So our telepathy and our capacity to speak directly mind to other human beings, to other animals, to other consciousnesses in other times and places, that's a beautiful sacred gift. And it's very unfortunate that it's been harmed and used against humanity to the point that most people think, I don't want anyone else in my mind except for me. And I think that right now, that is an appropriate approach. That is my approach, even though I am coming from and still connected to a consciousness collective. Because at this moment, there are so many imposters and there's so much static on the line and there's so much nonsense that it's like you're trying to play your own music and you've got all of these other interlopers. Everybody's got an opinion and not everybody is a trained musician. So once again, I applaud and agree with the approach right now of simply saying, hey, this is who I am in this physical epidermis-shaped container, and I'm thinking my own thoughts, and I need to just focus on my own thoughts, like focusing on my own music before I integrate with all these other people or bandmates. However, I think we really need to understand that there are other bandmates out there, and what a telepathic society or telepathic experience is like. You end up having other characteristics that are also inside of you, acting through you or melding with your own characteristics. Like with the telepathic experience, we could almost consider it, if we were in my studio and I could grab a pencil and a piece of paper, I would draw a funnel and different layers in the funnel, kind of like if you were straining some, spaghetti through a funnel, like through a colander or something like that. And that there are different layers, and that each of these different layers can be a different either persona, a different person, a different individual, or even a different collective, like a band. And that each of these different bands is sending out reverberations or frequencies that all culminate into a recipe. So your recipe as an individual is made up of A plus B plus C plus D plus et cetera, equals you. However, what if we take A plus B plus C plus D, et cetera, plus, I'm thinking of some symbol that is not in the human alphabet, pound sign, at symbol, that comes from someplace completely different. So you haven't given up your individual identity. What you have done is taken internally or allowed to manifest inside of you certain other characteristics. Now, again, I have to make a distinction between the unhealthy stuff that's going on Earth's surface right now, because there's a lot of demonic intervention. And demons, I classify as occupiers of the interstices. So these are the musicians who played so poorly that they no longer have instruments. They are stuck to the interstices like a bug that splatted on the windshield of a car, and they haven't moved since they've, splatted there. They are not people who know how to play good music. They are not people who should be influencing anybody else's mind in the time field. They died. They hit the membrane of death. They are not good musicians. And that's why it's like right now I'm telling everyone, like, think your own thoughts. Don't listen to all these imposters, interlopers, play your own music, because we're in this really screwed up situation. However, I'm giving you a description of what it would be like if we were not in this screwed up situation. Just like I said on other broadcasts, what it would be like if you went to a party where you could actually put your purse or your handbag down and not have to worry about someone stealing from you. Like, that's a totally different type of party than some kind of wild, crazy, raging, chaotic house party where you gotta, like keep track of all your possessions at all times and make sure that nobody tries to roofie you. They're not going to try to sedate you and drag you off to a corner somewhere. That is what Earth is much more like right now, unfortunately. So I'm not advocating for anyone to open up their mind or their body and allow something else to act through you. I'm really not saying that. And because this level of virtuosity to be part of a telepathic society has to do with being consensual and respectful of other people, just like being a musician in a band. You cannot rape your way to greatness. You cannot have, let's say, a 4-piece band where everybody is trying to play on top of each other and trying to force the rhythm and trying to force. It's like, that is not good music. Good music is about partnership, where you're like, I hear that guy playing that beat over there. Now I'm going to integrate this over here. And you look for signals like, hey, how does this feel to you? If it feels good, I'm going to keep going. And if this sounds bad, and if this feels bad, I'm not going to keep going. Boy, that's totally antithetical to what we experience here in this barbarian culture, where it's like, oh, this feels bad to you, I'm going to continue to oppress you. Really, it's like, F you, I'm just going to continue to oppress you. This is what government and religion and economy and, education and in many cases family members have done to everyone here. So I understand we're not at the good party where you can put your purse down, but I'm describing that party to you so that you can think about what it would be like. It's like planting a seed that then out of that, possibility grows the actual potential to actually have that experience. Telepathic society. So and this is also part of what I have to say. Real telepathy is done on a bridge of love, and it does not involve any kind of mechanical microchips, technology, boosters, amplifiers, or fake boobs in any way. I mean technically augmented assets is what I say by fake boobs. It is completely done naturally. And right now, there are not only beings on Earth and off of Earth who are using augmented technology to augment their telepathy, and they've got fake boobs, and there are also beings who suppress other people's natural telepathy. So sometimes it can be an individuated attack where a person who is particularly psychically gifted is attacked through pharmaceutical drugs or directed energy weapons or rape or trauma or poverty or whatever to try to close down their inner eye. So we've got beings who have not earned the right, who have not earned the ability to play good music and be a loving contributor to the symphony. They bought their neural lace like at a store for rich people, and they had it implanted. And then they're like, oh, look, I'm a super being. I have my augmented telepathy, but it's not done on a bridge of love. And the problem with that is that it's signals that are static on the line instead of true signals. When I say static, you know what I mean. I mean like the type of black and white snow that you see on a television that is not functional, or that sound that you hear on radio if it's not functional. That those two forms of static are basically uncontrolled waves that are making a bunch of nonsense that we recognize not as music or harmony, but as noise. So there's a lot of static on the line in terms of telepathy of what we are experiencing. If you have a natural mind and you have any telepathic inner talent or proclivity, like clairaudience, or the capacity to actually hear other people, or the capacity to speak to other people, just using your mind, then one of the challenges is you probably hear a lot of nonsense, like being on the party line. This is like from a long time ago, definitely before my time of using telephones, maybe in the like 30s or 40s, when people didn't have individuated telephone lines. And so everybody in a neighborhood had the party line. And that means that everybody could hear everybody else's conversations. So you could be like, I'm trying to talk to Marge about going out for Italian food tomorrow. And we hear, Bob from down the street is talking about his lawnmower to Harry. This is like a totally disconnected conversation that is just happening on the same line. This is the party line. So it's very difficult to concentrate. You're like, hey, let's just talk about the restaurant. Let's not focus on what Bob is saying about the lawnmower. So this is for people that have natural telepathy. You might have noticed like, hey, not only do you sometimes get attacked, like intentionally targeted or attacked, but sometimes you just hear weird random crap that comes along because there's so much static. There's so many signals, errant signals that are going around. So if we used a neurology as an example, if we said that this mind network is like a biology neurology, errant signals, these are like pain signals. This is what happens if your foot falls asleep because you're sitting on your hip in a weird way that compresses your nerves, and then you get up and your nerves start to flow again and it makes that pins and needles pain feeling. Those are errant signals, or any form of peripheral neuropathy. If you are unfortunate enough to have, gone through chemotherapy or have some kind of, neurological disease, that those signals are static on the line. So what I'm describing to you in terms of telepathy is that there's pathology here. We are not in a healthy body right now. We're on a planet where there are errant telepathic signals that are not supposed to be there. So here, let me now describe the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be that you work and work and work and self-cultivate, just like a person that's an athlete who's going to run a marathon, except it's a marathon of the mind. And you work and work and work and train really hard. And through doing so, like an athlete does not put on an exoskeleton that moves their arms and legs and makes them run to the finish line. Athlete cultivates their body to be able to do what they need to do. So a real clairaudient, a real clairsentient telepath cultivates their inner talents. And you do this through meditation and mindfulness and different breathing practices and whatever works for you. Like there's lots of different teachers that teach all about this. And a lot of it has to do with cultivating certain mind states and going into certain levels of profound focus. And it's just like running a marathon. You got to build those muscles. And part of it is having natural talent. Like some people run much more easily than others who huff and puff, but anybody can learn to run. Anybody can run a couple of miles, and not everybody can run 26 or 100 miles in a day, but everybody can run some amount. And this is the idea of telepathy. It's our birthright. It's actually not something that is meant to be only for special people. This is actually meant to be the way that we communicate with each other, but let's call it Tower of Babel, like before all of these inhibitions were placed in between humans on Earth's surface, so that it was more difficult for humans to communicate. So we got a lot of different things going on. We got people who have natural telepathy that are being suppressed. Like I said, targeted. Sometimes they're targeted with diseases. Sometimes they are targeted with energy weapons that cause diseases. Sometimes they are targeted financially or have social pressures placed upon them. And any of these things, like it's the antithesis of being able to cultivate your mind, so that if it requires profound focus and the ability to meditate and the ability to be calm and peaceful and quiet inside to do some of these amazing mental things, then all you have to do if you want someone to not do it is make them live someplace where it's really loud and disrupted all the time, and where they never get enough rest, and where they always have to run on the hamster wheel in order to earn some money. Like if you do that to someone, they're not going to be putting that energy into their psychic talents. They're going to be putting their energy into, mere survival and just getting enough money for food and groceries. So that is done to a lot of people. And then the flip side of that, in this out of balance, fun house of distorted mirrors that we live in, fun, quote unquote, house, not so fun house, we also have the flip side of people who have no psychic talent. And these are the people that would be like considered non-athletes, either super fat or super skinny, sitting on the couch and never cultivating themselves. But these are the guys who decide, I'm going to just slap on an exoskeleton that will magically, mechanically move my arms and legs, and then I will be able to run 26 miles. Breathe onto your nails and polish it on your little shirt. Like that'll be super easy, And that's not how it's supposed to be. I'm trying to portray those beings as beings that want to work the system. People who are trying to game the system, like, oh, run a marathon? I want to run a marathon, but I don't want to do all those years of work and self-cultivation. Just like, let's skip directly to the finish line. So that is their whole approach. And those are users of technology who use technological augmentation in order to be able to do what should be done purely naturally. So, of course, all of this is troubling because our experiences here on Earth are supposed to be what prepares us for our expanded experiences elsewhere and elsewhen. And because we have so much iniquity and out of balance systemic imbalance is a better way of saying it. We have so much systemic imbalance here that it is very difficult for humans to cultivate their consciousness to the point where they are, or we are, ready to go to a new level of telepathic experience. So there are beings that exist on a galactic scale who are individuated beings and who are also connected to a telepathic network. And they derive their identity not only as who they are as an individual, but also who they are on their team. And none of this is wrong or evil. Like, again, I'm describing a loving experience here. So maybe it's like being on a football team or a baseball team where you say, I am, this individual person, and sorry about my furry overlord barking in the background. I'm this individuated person, and I also work with these other 10 or 11 people in order to make up this team that is called, the Yankees or the Giants or whatever. I'm not that into sports, so I'm not going to take the metaphor that far. But just like on a sports team, each player has their own individual position, and you can say, I'm the pitcher, or I'm the tight end, or I'm this or that. and you know what your duties are, and you know who you are and what you're doing, and you also understand that you are working with a collective or with a network of other people. And if you think I'm the quarterback and I'm the only thing, then it's like you can throw the ball, but if there's no one there to catch it, then you do not have a team. So this is also about getting up to this next level of collaboration on a social level. Has everything to do, like I'm talking about epigenetics and getting past our limitations of competition, because I really enjoy the work of Bruce Lipton. He's a geneticist, and he talks about epigenetics and the code that rules the code, and about how this idea of Darwinism is, a reflection of the perspective of the age that Darwin lived in, the late 1800s, and this whole idea of competition and the necessity of competitive capitalism. And then contrasting that with the idea of what's really going on in the natural world, that there are profound levels of collaboration happening. Even the microbes in your tummy are collaborating with your intestines to be able to digest your dinner that you just ate, or your breakfast that you just ate. Like that, you can't even finish your breakfast without collaborating with 3 trillion gut microbes. So you're not just the lone quarterback throwing your passes and having no one else field them for you. Like, you are working together with an enormous network. And again, I recognize we're on this planet that is severely screwed up. So a lot of people just, they reach for individuality as their approach or response to that. It's kind of like saying, like, y'all are so screwed up, I can't even find other musicians to work with. I can't even find a team. I'm just going to practice on my own thing. I'm just going to be a soloist. And I understand that, and I understand that reaction. And let me tell you that will only take a person or an individual or an entity so far, that really, in order to get to these higher levels of complexity, just like in music, you can play a piano or play a guitar, you can play a solo, it's a beautiful thing, but it's not the same as playing with an entire orchestral symphony and the richness of the music that can happen, and also giving opportunities to other musicians for them to express themselves and the beautiful emotions that come out through their playing, and how that then reflects back to you. So this is what the higher levels of galactic society are like. They are not competitive. They are collaborative. That means I don't have to be up there being like, I'm going to fight against all of you guys so that I can be the biggest and I can be the strongest and I'm going to take over everything. Wah ha 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 ha. Like, no, it's really not like that. It's really more like, I am going to cultivate myself to be the best possible musician I can be, so that I have something really worthwhile, really nourishing, really new, really unique to give to this whole entire symphony. And imagine, because I know it's hard, because you might not be surrounded by people like that here in this time and place, but imagine like a fictional story of people who are all like that, who are all genetic virtuosos. And part of this is also getting past the ego, because the ego is the narrative structure of self-definition. And you say, my name is Joe Smith, I live at 123 Mockingbird Lane, this is my dog Trigger, and this is my favorite sweater. And I use that example all the time. And that is your individuated ego identity. But what if you're like, well, my name is Joe Smith and I have all these ideas inside of me, but 50% of my ideas come from this person over here who's named, Sally Greentree. And then it's like, are you really Joe Smith or are you really Sally Greentree? And a lot of people, when faced with the humans on Earth right now, when faced with that type of dilemma, would have, a crisis. They would have an identity crisis of not knowing who they are, and it could even be very unhealthy. So let me also just clarify here. I do not advocate for any kind of channeling, and I'm not a channel. I'm a walk-in, but I don't think that's really the right word for me. I'm a galactic abstraction that is living in this body, but I don't have anybody else living through me. I don't have anybody else moving my arms and legs or telling me what to do or anything like that. And if you look at old artist statements of mine, like I used to write things like, I work in partnership with, spirit guides, or I'm inspired by. And that's like saying, I had a music teacher that taught me what a D flat was. But at a certain point, like I took that information and I ran with it in my own direction. So yeah, when you look at my artwork, I take full responsibility for my artwork, for my ideas, for what the sounds of the flapping, moving mouth parts of this body, for my behaviors, for my gestures, and for my thoughts. I take responsibility for all of this. This is huge. This is really like the maturity necessary for getting to the next level of collaboration. Because I know a lot of people here in this time and place that are like, oh, it ain't my fault. Something else was acting through me. And the something else, quote unquote, can be any kind of scapegoat. It can be an angel. It can be a devil. It can be a religious figure. It can be a spirit person. It can be the disembodied ancestor. It can be the embodiment of addiction. Like all of that just means that you're not taking responsibility for what you have done with your own physical structure. So if you're like, oh, I'm drinking all this alcohol, it's totally self-destructive and I'm destroying my life, but it's not my fault, it's my alcoholism of my family coming through me or something like that. Like that's, you're not going to get to the levels of self-responsibility and collaboration if you're doing stuff like that. So a big part now is many people are recognizing that they have been subjected to some level of trauma-based mind control, which is kind of a splintering of the overarching ego, so that there are then sub-personas that might do things that are not controlled by the overarching meta-ego. And even that, you can't make an excuse. You can't say, oh, but I've got multiple personality disorder, and that was a sub-persona that did that. Like a sub-persona picked up a gun and shot that guy over there. It's not my fault. I didn't do that. And that's not fair, because in truth, it is an aspect of self. So now we are getting down to how we define self, what we claim as self. And the stuff that we have in our own lives that we might not wish to claim as self is absolutely directly analogous to the otherworldly beings or extraterrestrials or extra-dimensionals that display either positive or negative personality characteristics. Because all of the quote-unquote others, all of the them out there that you think you're interacting with something other than you, it's actually yourself in a mirror. And again, we're in a distorted funhouse right now. So a lot of what you're interacting with is distorted. And so it's a real challenge to, I want to say, tease this out, like you tease out knots in a hair with a comb. Like, how to get this going straight so they understand this. But so I'm trying to say, a lot of people say, hey, I got MK Ultra mind control. It ain't my fault. Someone else is pulling my strings. Blame the puppet master. Believe me, there's a lot of people on this planet right now that are using that as their crappy, totally unjustifiable excuse for doing horrible, horrible things. Like for raping children, literal murder, like the most horrific crimes you can imagine, that people participate in these dark rituals, and then they get a mind wipe, or they get bifurcated, or fragmented, and it means that they can walk around with a smile on their face being like, I'm such a great person, because they have amputated the part of themselves that is not great. Now, if we look at all of these divergent individual characteristics as being very similar to the different characteristics of various space races, like there are some space races that are horrible rapists, and they're horrible. And there are some that are wonderful and benevolent and incredibly loving and appropriate collaborationists. And all of these are characteristics of the great meta personality that, there's this enormous entity that is galactic scale, that we are each shards of its persona, or we are each flavors in its recipe. So I'm the Aurora flavor, and you're the John Smith flavor, or the Sally Greentree flavor. And that each of these flavors is necessary and is adding up to the overall recipe of the cake that, makes things happen. However, we are also recognizing that there are some flavors that are pathogenic, that are not supposed to be in the recipe. We're in this recipe like, wait a minute, we're not supposed to add 12 cups of flour. We're supposed to add 2 cups of flour. Where did that extra 1 come from? Why is this cake not working properly? Because if the cake worked properly, there would be no disease and there would be no death. Okay? That's how you can tell the cake is not working properly. Our cake is like a horrible mess. We have a lot of suffering. We have a lot of disease. We have a lot of death. And it's like if you hear an engine, these guys with their Harley Davidson motorcycle engine, it's very loud and it's, you hear it down the street. It's a very inefficient engine, because a perfect engine would not emit any extra energy in the form of noise or heat or friction. All of that energy would simply be directed into the motion of the pistons, or the motion of the wheels that it's attached to. So anytime that we see things like suffering and disease and death, we're recognizing that that is friction, or noise or heat in this engine of consciousness that is showing us that there's some inefficiency. And so what we are trying to do as individuals is figure out, here's the journey, figure out who you are as an individual and which parts inside of you are supposed to be there and which parts aren't. And I can't define that for you. You are like an artist. This is your own painting, and this is how I approach this. It would be totally unethical for me to try to say to someone else, hey, this is the real you, but this is the fake you. You got to figure it out for yourself. I can definitely tell you about my own journey, that I spend a lot of time, because I'm telepathic, figuring out where did this thought come from, as opposed to, is this thought arising from within? And I will tell you that a great deal, like 80% of what I experience here in this time and place in terms of thought, is not arising from within, and it's not even in my natural mind, which is the nonverbal mind. So I'm understanding that a lot of what is passing through me is not the real me. And that's like saying if you ate a bunch of food, but it's like, that's not really food that is going into your body. It's just passing through your intestinal tract and then will come out the other end. I think that is what is going on with a lot of the imposters and errant thoughts and intrusive thoughts and static on the line. A brief pause. And brief pause while I say my work. So you can say you as an individual, you are the culmination of your own thoughts and also your education and your religion and all of these other thoughts that have been implanted into you, or thought structures that have been implanted into you. And of course, you as an artist, you can always say, I choose to get rid of and reject all of that stuff. You know, if you go to art school and they tell you, always paint like this and never paint like this, and only hold your paintbrush like this and never use this color, you can be like, that sounds stupid. I'm getting rid of all of those rules. And you can hold your paintbrush however you want, and you can paint with whatever color you want. Like, that is totally appropriate. I advocate for that. All of this is about you making your own individual choices, because if you could build your house in any way that you wanted to build your house, what would you make it like? What would you make it shaped like? I think that says a lot about a person as an individual. You know, if you could do anything you wanted to with your life or with your body or with your mind, what type of life, body, or mind would you create? Would you create a horrible, diseased body? Would you create an oppressive structure where you're like, I'm the biggest, strongest, most toothy, fearsome monster, and I'm going to go around oppressing everyone else? Or would you be like, I'm going to create, you know, the most cool, musical, harmonious container possible, like that can jam with all these other wonderful musicians? I think it says a lot about each one of us as an individual. So again, I'm not a channeler. That means that I don't have some other quote unquote ascended master speaking through me. And I got a lot of issues with people that think that ascended masters are speaking through them, because if you're truly an ascended master, you have graduated. We are in a university right now. We're in a schoolhouse. And the schoolhouse is severely distorted, and we're all struggling to be able to even learn the basic lessons of reading, writing, and arithmetic here. However, once you learn how to navigate the time field and you make it out through that little wormhole, you end up, you know, in a new expansive reality. You graduate. You don't come back. You don't have to still do stuff here. You're out of kindergarten. You're out of first grade. You're on a different level of education, having a different life experience. So why would any quote unquote self-described ascended master feel the need to return to university? It's like, what is this, homecoming, where it's like you graduated, but you're going to come back the next year and, you know, just hang out with everyone? No, that is inappropriate. And then you can ask this very cogent question, Aurora, what are you doing here? Because you're a galactic abstraction. So the answer is, I have a reason for being here. It's not just a sightseeing tour for me. It is not just a recreational pleasure cruise in order to be here. That the thing is basically an ego desire. So I'm trying to tell everyone that you don't have to get rid of your ego, and your ego is not, by definition, there's not something wrong with your ego, and that your ego can serve a purpose, and that is even appropriate to have certain desires. Like if you have an idea and you really, really want to turn it into a song or a painting and share it with other people, that is a valid and positive ego motivation. It's like saying, I baked this pie and now I really want to share. I want to cut it up into slices, put it on plates, eat it at a picnic with everyone. I want to put a little dollop of ice cream on top of this pie. That is a noble motivation for being here. So I'm telling you guys, my motivation for being here, my motivations are noble. in the world that is in between like the physical world and the world of pure thought, I created that form that is called the Flying Rainbow Lasagna. And I said, hey, I just made this new thing and I really want to share it with people directly. I really want to be in a body and be able to make a sculpture or an image or tell people about it. That was the motivation for me to be in a body. It's a noble motivation. I didn't say, I want to rape, I want to pillage, I want to steal, I want to oppress others. I want to take prisoners. I didn't say anything like that. Those would be non-noble motivations, even though, of course, there are some people that are motivated by those types of feelings inside of themselves here. So yeah, I love myself, meaning I accept that I have those motivations, and that's why making the artwork and the sculptures and doing this type of work and doing webinars and videos is so important and gratifying to me, because I'm doing what I need to do with my time and I made a choice to be here. And also, yeah, I'm under a lot of duress, like so is everyone here. We've got radiation in the atmosphere and all these crazy EMFs and polluted food and polluted atmosphere. And, I get targeted and lots of other people get targeted too. It's a battle to be here. Like I said, it's not a pleasure cruise. And so part of it is solidarity. It's like, yeah, I'm swimming around down here with everyone. It ain't easy, but we're all doing it together, because I also feel that that's part of a noble ego aspect of my own recipe. The idea of, well, I'm going to be, alongside of everyone. I'm not just going to be like, oh, like special treatment, just bring, like snap, 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 bring my limo and just drive me there. That's not my personality characteristic. So all of this, it's not even to say good or bad. It's to say, what's your recipe? And your recipe is made up of the different aspects of who you are. So inside of me, I recognize that I have different aspects. Just like in your genetic physical code, you can be like, well, I get this trait from my mom and I get this trait from my dad. Or you can say, I went to music school and I learned this riff from my trumpet teacher and I learned this riff from my piano teacher. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You're allowed to learn from other people. That's totally noble and totally appropriate. And this broadcast, I wanted to focus on the idea of elevating our definition of self. Because if you have the same color eyes as your mom, you have your own eyes. You don't have your mother's eyes. You have your own eyes that are a reflection or a similar expression as your mom's eyes. So if there is some idea that is an idea at large, concept that is coming through you, that's an idea that is coming through you, like a song that is being played through your fingers or the singing through your voice. And, when I sing a favorite pop song, if I sing something that's on the radio, I try to sing it the best I can with my own voice, not merely to mimic what the professional singer is doing, because they have a different vocal apparatus. So in everything in my life, I'm trying to do what is the right approach, the right shape, the right tone for my physical body structure, and to approach life in the right way. So yeah, okay. So this whole idea of being a channel, I think is like allowing oneself to be raped or abused. That it is not a benevolent or good. I think that it's exploitation. Because I think that the beings that have a motivation to want to speak to this realm through a physical conduit, like through taking on someone else's larynx and mouth and breath control, that those beings, why are their thoughts any more important than the thoughts of the people in this realm? Like literally, I could have stayed in a non-dimensional state and been like, oh, I'm going to get a channeler to share everyone, to get my ideas shared with the world. I didn't do that. I got a body, I got my own mouth, I got my own larynx, and that is who is speaking to you right now. Like, I'm being really, really clear, and I hope you guys, that long-term listeners, thank you for tuning in. New people, thank you for tuning in for the first time. So people that know me for a long time, I think that you're really getting this idea that I have battled very fiercely in order to be in control of my own vocal cords. Because believe me, it's like if you have a nice car and lots of people want to drive it. It's like, no, actually, it's my car. It's my Ferrari. You can't drive it. So that is what it's like when you have a body. There's all these different spirit people that are like, oh, you have a nice car. I'd love to drive it. Really, I recommend don't let them. It's your car, and you're responsible for all of the dings, and you're responsible for the car insurance, and you're responsible for the gas. You don't just let anybody drive your car, and your vehicle is your car. And what a lot of these otherworldly beings, they try to be like, well, you're just a lowly, stupid, idiotic human ego. You don't know what you're supposed to say or do. I am a spirit person. I know what I'm supposed to say or do, so I'm going to speak through you. But it's like, if you're such a great spirit person, why are you a spirit person without a body? This is the whole idea, that there is this programmed sense that humans have that having a body is less valuable than being a spirit person. And I'm trying to tell everyone, no, it's the opposite way around. Spirit people lost their bodies. They're not the people who have successfully transcended reality. These are the beings that got stuck on the interstices. And they can be completely turned around in their motivations. They can be like, oh yes, I'm really a divine ascended master, and I'm really going to help people by inhabiting their body and speaking through them. So I understand also that this is where some of the skepticism comes from. When I tell people about me being a walk-in, that they think, oh, like that I'm some kind of an interdimensional fat ass that's like, oh, I'm just going to speak through this person and then, go off and do some cool interdimensional stuff, and then they have to figure out their car insurance. That's not what I am. I'm a person that has to figure out their car insurance, and I have to figure out how to get my electrons to flow in a wire, and I have to go to the grocery store or, the farmer's market and get good food and put it in my body and do exercise and take care of my body. So that's one of the big things that I started to learn. I'm like, hey, if there's this channel, like this entity out there that wants to speak through a physical body, that's great. It's exploitation if that non-physical entity does not take care of the needs of the physical body. Like if that being is only there for 5 minutes of flapping of the moving mouth parts, and they're not there for the other 23 hours and 55 minutes of the day where you have to eat and use the toilet and make sure you have enough toilet paper and even scrub the toilet, is that entity that wants to speak through your mouth and larynx. Are they going to help you scrub the toilet? This is a real question, because they live in a non-dimensional state. They don't have a body, they don't make poop, and they don't have the capacity to scrub a toilet. So they're like, oh, you go down there, you eat a bunch of food, you deal with the body, you deal with groceries, you deal with money, you deal with the hellish economy. And then for an hour a day or 5 minutes a day or whatever, you're like, I'm going to take over your body and I'm going to act through you. To me, that is exploitation. Because unless you actually took care of that body 24 hours a day, you're not contributing to its towards its upkeep. It's like saying, I only want to drive the car around. I don't actually want to put gas in it, or change its oil, or wash its exterior, or vacuum its interior, or do anything like that. I just want to put miles on the chassis, and none of that is okay. So to clarify again, I do not and have not ever described myself as a channel. And I'm really myself acting through myself. But when I say myself, the self-identity that I'm describing here is a galactic scale being. And I know it. I'm self-aware. Like, I'm not pretending or forgetting in being here. I'm very aware that that's who I am, and that is who is speaking down here. And sometimes I'm so tickled. I'm like, oh yeah, like I'm this galactic person, and I'm, making scrambled eggs in the morning and then washing my dishes. That is part of being here. That's really part of being here. And I take responsibility for what I do here. I make my food. I wash up after my food. I, get my food at the farmer's market. Like, I hope that you can tell who I am and my value system by the way that I act. I don't just delegate all of this to someone else. I'm going to sit on a cloud, and you can deal with going out and buying eggs, and you can deal with the not very much fun part of scrubbing out the egg pan. Like, no, I actually do all of that. And, boy, it would be lovely to have a servant to do all of that. But even think about that. Then we got, okay, then how about when does your servant get to do self-cultivation? When does your servant get to rise to higher levels of inner consciousness work if they're constantly serving you like that? Doesn't seem very fair either. So there are all these questions about that. Okay, wait. So I have a little bit more time wrapping up the idea and going back to having a telepathic society, because in a telepathic society, no one is exploiting anybody else. No one is saying, oh, I want to put my thoughts and my mind into your mind because I don't have a body, or I don't have the capacity to do this, but you can do this for me. That's essentially the idea of, these channels, channeled information, the ascended people acting through or writing through people. I mean, my goodness, like if you were an ascended master and you really wanted to send a message into the world, like then just vibrate the keys of a keyboard and just have it magically appear. Why do you need a physical conduit to write on the keyboard for you? So my real understanding is that a lot of channeled information is either synthetic telepathy, from malevolent aspects of our own government who are working in conjunction with malevolent technology using extraterrestrials, and also people's own, channelers' own ego residue. That if you have your own religious expectations or religious programming, and then you look through the window has smears on it, that it's like the residue that is affecting the clear view through that window or through that portal. So if you think you're going to got a lot of religious background training, you think you're going to talk to Jesus, and some voice in your head says, I am Jesus. And you're like, oh, good, I'm talking to Jesus. So it's like you're talking to an aspect of self. This is what I really think is going on, and this is what I'm trying to say. When we begin to interact telepathically with otherworldly beings, we are talking to other aspects of a self. The self here is a cosmic self. You're not just this little human container. You are a much larger cosmic self. And you are the culmination of all of these different personality characteristics that are, some of them are human or earthling, and some of them are otherworldly. Or basically, the understanding here is that otherworldly beings are just like you, but they are coming from a very different direction, and they're moving at a vastly different rate. And so there are different levels of self-cultivation. Some beings are incredibly self-cultivated and incredibly loving. They're virtuosos. They're very good musicians. And some of them are crappy musicians. You don't want to have anything to do with them. You don't want to listen to their music, much less play along with them, because playing along with them would be like getting a disease and dying. So all of this is about how to effectively connect with these otherworldly beings. So I have a couple of paintings, and one of them is Birth of a New Dimension, that shows these, different faces being telepathically connected. And I have another drawing that I did of this too, the idea of your pineal gland / inner eye being both a sender and a receiver. It's a transceiver. You both transmit there and receive through there. And, let me just say my work. There's this television show that I think is good to use as an analogy, but not a direct analogy, called Sense8. And it's on Netflix, and it's the idea of different groups of humans that are beginning to have a telepathic awakening and also empathic awakening, because they can talk to each other mind to mind without technology and also feel each other's emotions. And they can even share characteristics, like one person is a kung fu master, one person is a driving expert, one person is a nurse, and that if you have a need for any of those particular talents, that you can simply draw upon any member of your, community, your telepathic community. So it's just a nice analogy, or the idea is being planted, the seed is being planted into human mind right now. That's really what our true nature is. However, in the show, it's interesting because it shows that there are some beings who are very loving and they're connected to one another. And if you're connected and you feel someone else's pain, you're not going to hurt someone else. And then there are some beings who are connected to other people and they're like, oh, I'll happily cause you pain. Like I feel and I recognize your pain, and I'm going to cause you pain anyway. So there's different motivations in that show. But this is what I'm trying to get across. They're in the setup of the cosmos, like the basic structure of the cosmos. All of this is supposed to be done on a bridge of love, so that there are safety firewalls. Like you don't stab yourself with a knife unless you're self-destructive. Some people are self-destructive. I have to recognize this because I'm not self-destructive. I go to great lengths not to stab myself with knives. So I think, oh, everyone's like me, but not everyone is like me. So on a higher dimensional level, everybody has already passed the audition. Everybody is already a loving being that is a virtuoso, that is self-cultivated, and is really ready to connect and share ideas and propensities with other people, and also to send that out and to receive it back. That's the whole idea of your pineal gland or your inner eye, that you're supposed to be able to send out to others and also receive information. And some of that information is in the form of nourishment, because I speak on this broadcast almost every week about re-transforming into being light eaters. That's our heritage, it's where we came from, and it's what we are going to transform into again. That's our true nature, that we don't have to use plants or animals as an intermediary, and that we dare connect our attention, attenuate with our third eye to the sun directly. And that's where you get your nourishment from. So you get ideas, you get nourishment, you can have all sorts of things come into you, and you can also send things out of you to other people. And some of the things you send out of you can be thoughts and ideas and nourishment. And I use this a lot too, but it's like it's a fantasy, don't take it too literally, but the idea that when we become this, telepathic society, one of the first things that we do with one another is become chefs of the mind. So it's a good practice. It's what I do with my food while I am here in the body. I eat my food as if I am remembering it or making like an indelible recording that I can draw upon at any time. And vegetarians, you don't have to listen to this, but I use this example all the time also. My friend's fried chicken that he made at that holiday party. So I don't usually eat fried chicken. I usually eat, much more healthy stuff. But my friend made this wonderful buttermilk soaked fried chicken that he fried in lard, which is really what makes it really good. And I was sitting there in his kitchen eating it, and I was like, I am remembering this for the day, a time when I might no longer have physical taste buds, but this is so enjoyable. I want to be able to remember it. It's not just for you, that you can draw upon that memory and transmit it or broadcast it to another person. And it doesn't just have to be a flight of fancy. It can actually be a form of nourishment, a mental thought form that you can eat. So this is getting way beyond the whole idea of like the Star Trek replicator where you press a button and can get any amount of hot Earl Grey tea or whatever you want out of the wall. This is different and it's way more direct. And it also requires virtuosity. It requires that when you had those physical nourishments, you really saturated your senses with it and can really remember it and draw upon it. It's exactly like this. In very old school art training programs, like hundreds of years ago, what they would do is put the figure model at the top floor of like a 3-story building, and you would go up to where the figure model was, look at it, look at the person, look at the folds of the cloth, and look at the shading, and then you had to go back down to where your easel was several floors below. And you had to then try to remember what you had seen and recreate it. And if you couldn't remember it, walk back up the flights of stairs, go look at the model again. And the idea is that this was training artists to use their eyes and their perception, to really effectively record and remember reality so that they could then reproduce it with charcoal and paper or on a canvas. I'm talking about super old school. I don't think anybody teaches art like this anymore, but that's the idea, that you become a virtuoso by being so well trained in what you can remember with your senses and draw upon later, that you are able to recreate or reconstruct something that you perceived. So that's the idea with this food. And that when we first become telepathic, one of the most fun things we can do is be like, oh, hey, I remember this meal. Let me feed you this meal. And they'll be like, oh, that's wonderful. And it's not just a flight of fancy. It contains actual nourishment. So that's, I bring these up. This is yoga of the perception. This is beginning to stretch the mind or the belief of what is possible into new directions. You don't go directly to the super bendy scorpion pose or, some crazy kind of back bend. You work your way up to it. So becoming a light eater, becoming a telepathic citizen of the cosmos, this is like doing the super bendy back bend. We're working our way up to it. And I thank you so much for everyone who's on the journey with me and everybody who's doing this self-cultivation.